Hi, I'm Jason Dasey, former CNN, BBC, and ESPN broadcaster. I'm also an experienced radio host. I used to have my own interview show on Singapore's Money FM. I'm currently working for ABC News in Brisbane, and I have my own small consultancy company, Cockatoo Media. And these are my top 5 interview tips. Now, if you've seen my show reel, you probably can gather that I've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews over the years, and this could be with politicians, sports people, pop stars, artists, chefs, police officers, lawyers, you name it, I've probably interviewed them. And these are the basic principles that I use whenever I prepare to do an interview. And that's the first tip, in fact, preparation. We've all heard the expression, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. This is 100% true when it comes to getting ready for an interview and having success in your interview procedure. I always sit down, it's so easy these days, go to the internet and look up some stuff about the person I'm about to interview. And I always try and get it from multiple sources, not just Wikipedia, which we know can be wrong. I might look at The Guardian, but then I'll also look at maybe The Australian and Sky News to get a different perspective. It's so easy now. So when I'm preparing for an interview, I actually sit down and I write out bullet points for the questions I'm about to ask. And this, of course, can be full questions where you actually write out the question you're going to ask, or just a bullet point. I find it easier to look at the bullet point, you look down on your paper, you know what you're going to ask next. So preparation is very, very important when you are about to do an interview. Point number 2, listening. Now, in some ways, this may sound a bit counterintuitive when it comes to the preparation, because you want to do a certain thing with your interview, but you also need to kind of be flexible. So with this listening, I'd also say flexibility. So when you hear an answer from the person you're interviewing, it may mean you need to take a slightly different tack to the way that you've gone with your preparation. And many famous stories about people being so prepared and so rigid in the way that they're approaching an interview, they miss an incredibly big point or big story. So really listen carefully and look for those openings. And obviously, if you do hear something that's really good, let's say you're interviewing a politician who kind of confesses to doing something illegal, and maybe just gives a hint at that. He may want to get something, or she may want to get something off their chest. So you need to pursue that and go the next step after step after step, and then try and get back to your original flow. And in fact, that is the third point, flow. That's the third tip for my interview tips for getting the perfect interview. When you are going off track and you are following a different lead, and perhaps you've got your preparation, you need to get back on track to make sure you cover everything you sat down to achieve. So if you're doing a 5-minute interview for radio, which is a typical length for radio segments, maybe a bit longer, you can't go to 30 minutes and make sure you get everything ticked off your list. So in a way, when you interview someone, you're taking them on a journey, and you're also taking your listeners and your viewers on a journey too. So very, very important to have that flow, to have that structure, and make sure that the interview achieves what you want to really achieve. And it's very, very important too that when you are doing an interview, it doesn't have to be chronological. And of course, chronological is if you're interviewing, say, someone who's been very successful as a celebrity, as an actor, you go through their career. That's not always the most interesting thing to listen to. Of course, you can do that for some of the way, but I'll give you an example. Stan Grant, he's one of my colleagues at ABC, and of course, we work together at CNN as well. And he was doing an interview with Alex McKinnon, who was a former rugby league player who suffered a terrible injury quite a few years ago, where he was left in a wheelchair. So Stan Grant was sitting down with Alex McKinnon, and he started the interview by saying, "Who is Alex McKinnon?" And this was a great question to start with, because it really got things going. Now, if Alex McKinnon was just a young player who was 20 years old and coming onto the scene, he wouldn't really be very aware of himself. But the fact that Alex McKinnon has gone through this incredible journey, with having the injury and being in a wheelchair and his career ending and his whole life turned upside down, he gave this very, very powerful response. And after that was a great interview. I think Stan went back to the early days after that initial question. So the flow of an interview is very, very important. Point number 4, open-ended questions. Now, when I used to work at ESPN in the US, I actually went to interview mastery, an interview workshop with someone they bring in from outside, and he always said that try and ask questions that don't give a yes or no response. Open-ended questions: why, what, who, where. Always you have to give information. And of course there are some occasions where you need to ask yes and no questions because you need to get information, whether it's from a law enforcement officer or a politician. So you do have to do it sometimes, but particularly when you're doing a profile on someone, it's very, very important to give them the chance to say what they want to say. Here's an example. Many years ago, I was working at the NBC affiliate in Denver, Colorado. I was a local news reporter, and there was a very, very big story. There was a well-known golfer who was playing his first tournament after losing his wife in a tragic road accident. And of course, an emotional story. What do you do when that happens? And it was a really bad accident. It was a freak accident. She was standing and a taxi reversed into her. And I'm like, wow, this is a really good story. So it was actually a package we were doing. So I wanted to get some really strong sound bites, and I'm really doing all the wrong things. I'm asking questions with yes and no answers, and I'm trying too hard to get that sort of emotional response. And at the end of the interview, I was totally frustrated. But at this station, KUSA 9 used the NBC affiliate in Denver. The camera operators have a lot of power. They're award winners, and they are able to ask questions. So the guy that I was working with, Dave DeLosier, who's an award-winning photographer, he actually asked the great question and got a fantastic response. He said, "What does golf mean to you now?" That was a great question, and we got the answer we were waiting for. He opened up, he talked about his emotions, about losing his wife, all sorts of things about what he saw as his role in the world being, and all this about giving love and sharing and, opportunity. You never know when you're going to, lose your life. And this was a great lesson to me. And if you want to check out someone that asks these questions very well, they're very open-ended questions, very simple questions too. Always be simple. A guy that I used to be a colleague with at ESPN and also CNN, his name is Tom Rinaldi. So look up Tom Rinaldi and you'll see some great examples about what I'm talking about. Okay, point number 5, my top 5 interview tips. Detachment. When you're interviewing someone, don't fall in love with them. Don't become enamored with them. It's very easy to do, especially if you're a young reporter and you're interviewing a celebrity. If you're interviewing Hugh Jackman or Nicole Kidman, you admire them so much and you love their work and all that. So here's an example about that. It's very important to stay detached. So a few years ago, I launched the Asian edition for a major international website. So I got together a small team of reporters. And one of the guys I hired, he's a really enthusiastic guy, he knew his stuff, but he always used to fall in love with the people he interviewed. So it was a digital platform. So he'd write stories about the likable 25-year-old, the affable so-and-so, He'd always give these superlatives, these great adjectives, and they were very much out of place. But the reason he wrote that is because he admired them so much and he was so enthusiastic that he dropped these in. And of course, we don't want to do that. As journalists, we don't want to do that. And it also comes through to PR professionals who want to, plant little things in your story. Can you mention that, there's this open day and it's 10% off? And as journalists, unless we're doing branded content, we're not supposed to do that. So do not fall in love with the person you're interviewing. Keep your detachment and make sure you stay on track with what you're doing. It's very, very easy to kind of get overwhelmed, especially when you're starting out. But even if you've been doing it a long time and you're finally interviewing your hero, it's very, very difficult. So just to recap my 5 top interview points: preparation, listening, flow, open-ended questions, and detachment. So I do hope there's something in that for you. I would like to wish you all the best with your journalistic voyage throughout your career. If you want to know more about me, do check me out at YouTube, Jason Dasey, Cockatoo Media. You can see some examples of my recent work, and on all the major social media platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, I'm Jason Dasey. All the best, and I'll see you next time.